Hello everybody, Mark Johnson Jr. again. I'm the host of Reform GGA. And in this video I have to accomplish two things. First of all, a range yesterday. The two primary guns that we're going to be talking about there are the KS-47 from Palmetto State Armory and also the AK-103, also from Palmetto State Armory, which, by the way, is not a true AK-103. I've talked about that in previous videos, but that's what they call it, so we'll go with that. And then after that, I hope to address a comment that one of the viewers left for me to asking me to respond to some of the issues that he has encountered with his Palmetto State Armory AK. But before we do that, range reports, and we'll just go ahead and start with the PSA AK-103. Because it's handy. This gun so far has done quite well. I've liked it quite a bit. I've enjoyed shooting it quite a bit. It's a very fun gun to work with, and I've kind of mostly, more or less, turned it into my recreational AK. I put some furniture on it that I like, other than the furniture that it came with. Got the wonderful enhanced safety. Got the ALG trigger on it. I got the primary arms 3X. Prism scope on it in a master mount rail. It's just a fun system to work with, and I really enjoy this as kind of my fun plinking gun. And with it being a chrome lined barrel, I don't really feel too bad about putting a bunch of rounds through it willy-nilly, because chrome lined barrels have pretty good endurance as far as that is concerned. For a long time, my major issue with this gun has been getting some kind of decent accuracy data, and this past trip out to the range was no different in that regard, and that the conditions were just not conducive. I shoot from a rather rickety plastic table that I bring with me because it's easy to bring with me. That's why I have it, but it is a rickety plastic table that shakes a lot, and where I shoot, southern Idaho, in that particular region of southern Idaho, the wind tends to be pretty bad. It's not uncommon at all to have 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and yesterday was certainly no exception, and that causes the table to shake. Also, the place where I shoot is, if the sky is relatively clear, I get a lot of sun glare, and so between the wind conditions shaking the table and sun glare causing weird things, I usually don't get very good groups to begin with. But I've gotten to the point with it where I don't think that this target that I'm going to show you is ultimately representative of what the gun is capable of. It's more representative of what I'm capable of, given the platform that I'm shooting from, given the windy conditions, given the sun glare problems, etc., etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this is probably the worst that you could expect. I think that everybody could get this result or better, and that is this target right here. So this was at 100 yards, and I was shooting some of this Wolf Military Classic 124 grain full metal jacket stuff, and I got a group that at the extremes from center to center measures 3 1/4 inches, so basically just outside of 3 MOA, and this was the first group that I shot after getting the gun zeroed. So this isn't going through and cherry picking the best one or the worst one. This is just get it zeroed, put 5 shots on the target, see where they land, and this is what I wound up with. I'm pretty sure that everybody out there is going to be able to achieve better results than this, and that is actually an encouraging thing to me. Like I said, I'm very much so sure that this is not representative of what the gun is capable of, because you see that this is very much so a strung out group here. And whenever I get this kind of diagonal stringing in most of my groups, it's a me problem, it's not a gun problem. It's sun glare, it's rickety table that's shaking, and depending on where it happens to be in that shake process, when I let the trigger go off, will kind of change things a little bit. That's a me problem, that's not a gun problem. So this is what I would consider to be basically the worst possible scenario, is a 3 1/4 MOA group with relatively cheap, inexpensive ammo, and that's not really surprising. That ammo is really not all that awesome. It's better than Tula ammo, for sure. Some of my groups with Tula have been like 4 and 5 inch groups, which is definitely not great with me behind the trigger, you know. But that ammo is halfway I would say halfway decent, but that's not really accurate. It's still bad ammo. It's definitely not match grade ammunition by a long shot, but it is better than Tula. It's usually 1 to 2 MOA better than Tula for me. And so that's encouraging. I bet you that with good ammunition, match grade ammunition, or even a lot of the brass case ammunition that is out there is going to be loaded more consistently than the steel case is. A more consistent load, it doesn't necessarily have to be great, but a more consistent load, maybe some of the ball null proper ammunition, because that tends to be loaded pretty consistently, would do a whole lot better. Of course, match loads would do a lot better. And then, of course, just having a more stable platform, you know, one that doesn't shake in the wind, probably a good idea. And for a lot of you guys, you're not going to have the sun glare problems that I have out there. Part of it is just bad eyes that do weird things in the sun, but also southern Idaho actually gets a lot more sun than some people think that it does. We are a high plateau desert, and when we have cloudless days, which we get quite a few of them because it's a desert, we only get like 14 inches of rain a year. Things can be really, really, really bright, and you know, it does weird things to you depending on the angle that you're looking at and trying to shoot from. So like I said, I think this is going to be the worst possible case for most people. And for an AK with a chrome lined barrel, shooting relatively poor quality ammunition, like I said, it's better than Tula, but this is still at the bottom end as far as ammunition is concerned. 3 MOA is not bad for an AK. Most of your import AKs are going to get somewhere between 3 and 5 MOA. That's just kind of a known thing with AKs. That's typical, kind of par for the course. 3 to 5 MOA is normal. A lot of people wind up with something that's relatively close to 4 MOA, and that's considered sufficient for AKs. AKs are not meant to be precision guns. Mine certainly is not meant to be a precision gun. They are meant for human-sized targets. Roughly out to about 400 yards maximum is really the practical range that they are meant to be used in a point at target shooting kind of thing. Now, yes, the Russian philosophy on shooting with an AK does go far beyond that, but that's with area targets. That's not shooting at a one target yourself kind of thing. It's shooting at maybe a formation, an encampment, something like that. It's not meant to be precise at that point. So as far as being able to hit one person, 400 yards is the max, and a 3 to 5 MOA gun is totally sufficient for that. And this one would be on the better side of that, even with a fairly bad group like this. And I would say that this is a fairly bad group. Like I said, the diagonal stringing there is definitely indicative of a me problem, not necessarily a gun problem. So I don't think it's a bad gun at all. For having a chrome lined barrel, which typically degrades accuracy, but increases longevity quite a bit. For having a chrome lined barrel and shooting quite poor quality ammunition, like I said, it's not as bad as Tula, but it's still on the lower end, I would say that it did pretty well. I'm still pretty convinced that I can do better than that. I bet you with the right ammunition, you could probably get 1.5 MOA out of this thing. Certainly under 2, I would be willing to bet. With the right ammunition, right shooter, right environments, and I'm not saying great strides and all those things, just, you know, don't have a rickety table that's shaking back and forth. That will solve a lot of problems right there. You know, shoot in a way that you don't have to deal with sun glare, things like that. You do that, and I bet you'll shave at least 1 MOA off of that group, if not more. And I bet you with the right load and a little bit more careful attention to whatnot, you could get 1.5 MOA out of it just fine. So that is how the Palmetto State Armory AK-103 is doing. In terms of reliability and all those kinds of things, it's what you would expect from an AK. I haven't had any major reliability issues. Yes, I can run the trigger fast enough that I can get hammer follow, but you're going to get that with any gun if you run the trigger fast enough. There's sometimes that I fail to reset on it just because I don't let the trigger out far enough, but that's going to happen with any trigger that you don't let out far enough, etc., etc. And I haven't actually had a lot of problems with that recently, and last time I was out yesterday, didn't have any problems of that sort, so it seems to be just fine, and I'm getting used to the trigger pull on it because it has that ALG trigger in it. Now it does. It didn't come from the factory with an ALG trigger, I should specify that. But it seems to be working out just fine for me. No major issues that way. I'm good there. As to the KS-47, I don't really do a whole lot of accuracy shooting with it, just because in my practical applications for it, it's not really what I got it for. I do like that it is capable of taking longer shots if I need to, so sometimes I'll play around with it, but I'm usually not shooting for accuracy. I'm just seeing whether or not I can hit the target at that distance, and generally speaking I can, and that's about all that I worry about with it. For me, it is my traveling bedside gun, and so I'm not really concerned with what it does, how tight of a group it holds at 200 yards. I'm much more concerned with how it shoots at like 25 yards. That's a little bit more applicable to its role. And this gun has caused me some headaches for sure. The first weekend that I got it put together, it took a little bit while to get everything put together, but the first weekend that I got it put together, I went out and shot 415 rounds total, and on that 415th round there were a few light strikes in there with Tula ammunition. It does not like Tula ammunition. On the 415th round, counting 3 light strikes total, Tula ammunition every single one of them, its extractor broke, and that kind of ended that. And then I was going through a process of trying to get a replacement extractor. Palmetto State Armory was not overly helpful in that process. I did reach out to the customer support, and they gave me the runaround, and I've explained that in previous videos. And I eventually reached out to Quiet Riot Firearms, and they were able to get me a brand new 7.62 by 39 bolts, and I salvaged the extractor from that one. And let's see if I can show you guys that. Yeah, that silver extractor that's in there now, the nickel boron coated one, that's the one I got from Quiet Riot Firearms. And so that's how I fixed that part of it. And given that the gun is extremely overgassed, and it's still extremely overgassed, I went ahead and put an H3 buffer in it to kind of help mitigate those problems. Doesn't solve everything, but it helps at least. And what was important about yesterday's shooting session is that it marks the points at which I have exceeded what the original extractor broke at. The original extractor broke at 415 rounds. Now total, this thing has gone, I think it is 845 rounds. So 15 rounds past the doubling point, 15 rounds past the initial breakage. Does that mean a whole lot? No, it just means that this particular extractor might be a little bit stronger than the last one, which I suspect. Another thing that I've stated in previous videos that I started doing with this gun is that I've started cleaning it more often. The first time that I put 415 rounds through it, that was without cleaning whatsoever, and the chamber on this thing gets filthy really quick. There's lots of blowback because it's overgassed, and so there's still a lot of material that's still in the barrel as the action is opening up, and you get a lot of carbon and whatnot that gets drawn through, and the extracted rounds come out with a fair amount of carbon on them. Not the extracted rounds, sorry. The extracted casings come out with a fair amount of carbon on them even now, but now I clean it roughly once every 120 rounds instead of 400 plus rounds, and I think that has also been helping in terms of longevity. So between the heavier buffer, the H3 buffer, and the new and improved extractor from Quiet Riot Firearms, and a more frequent cleaning cycle, we have gotten past the first breakage points. Now, I will be a lot more impressed with it once we're like 2 times that or 3 times that or 4 times that down the road and still haven't had another breakage. That would be really great, but at least it made it to that first hurdle without any major problems. Now, there have been some malfunctions with the gun along the way. Most of the time the malfunctions don't really concern me, to be honest, and that's because most of the time when the gun malfunctions, it's because I was bump firing it, and frankly bump firing it is really hard on any gun, and I do that just because I want to see what the gun is made of, and I don't want to, you know, baby it too much. Yes, I do clean it more often than I was hoping to have to clean it, but you know, I can handle an advanced cleaning schedule, a more frequent cleaning schedule, I should say. But when I'm actually at the range using it, I don't want to have to baby it too much, and so I go ahead and bump fire and do things like that because I know it puts a lot of stress on the gun, and it's basically the worst condition that the gun is ever going to get, because in a real life self-defense situation I'm not going to be bump firing the thing because that's not a very reliable way to hit anything that you want to hit. But it does put a lot of stress on the gun, and it lets me know where the weak points are, and usually lets me know where those weak points are well before you know, anything significant would happen, which is what I want. It's a good way to find those weak points. And the most common malfunction that happens when I'm doing that is what is called hammer follow, and it is where you pull the trigger soon enough in the operation of the gun that the hammer will basically just lightly tap on the back of the bolt carrier as it's coming forward, and it will ride that bolt carrier home. And so instead of having bolt carrier come forward first and then the hammer hitting it at full speed, instead the hammer just comes up and taps it and then just gently rides it home, and it doesn't have much force and it doesn't set off the round. And so you get a dead trigger, rack the gun, you're back in business. It's not a big deal, and it happens all the time with bump firing. Pretty much every gun that I've ever bump fired has had that problem. If you pull the trigger fast enough, eventually you're going to get to the point where you get hammer follow. That's not a big thing. Another thing that does concern me a little bit more, but again, it's only happened while bump firing it, so again, I'm not too worried about it, is I'm not really sure exactly how to classify this malfunction. It doesn't happen very often. I think it's happened a total of 2 times in those 845 rounds, and that is, it's kind of a stovepipe / double feed. I'll get a stovepipe, but rounds will be trying to feed at the same time that the stovepipe happens, and they don't feed correctly because the round is in the way. So it's kind of a combination between a stovepipe and a double feed. And that one, I'm not entirely sure exactly what is going on with it. My suspicion is that it's due to the gun being overgassed. My suspicion is that as the first round is being fired, the round that's in the chamber is being fired, because it's overgassed, it tries to open up the system too fast, and so a lot of the energy that would normally be spent in kicking the round out to the side, instead what happens is the bolt moves back so fast that the comparative difference in forces between the ejector that's trying to push it out to the side and the bolt speed going back will basically just cause it to sit there and spin, and it'll just sit there and spin in the injection port. And when the bolt comes back, it'll catch the outgoing round, and that's where the stovepipe will come from, and then the feeding issues are compounded by that stovepipe because the stovepipe round won't make it very far out. So as far as I can tell, it is an overgassing issue that causes those stovepipes. You get a lot more backwards momentum than you do to the side, and so you get some spinning action going on in there. And I'm pretty sure that's what's causing it. Now, like I said, that is something that has only happened while bump firing it so far. When I'm firing it normal semi-auto, as you would normally expect, it's not an issue. But under bump fire conditions, where you're really hammering things home and really making things go fast, it seems to be a bit of an issue. So again, I have mixed feelings about this. Because I use it as my traveling bedside gun. I do use it for self-defense purposes. And for one encounter, I would trust it well enough. I keep a pretty close eye on everything. Definitely keep a close eye on the extractor, keep a close eye on the locking lugs and all those kinds of things. Regularly check them and those kinds of things to make sure that nothing's gone wrong. And for one self-defense encounter, I would trust it. Would I want to send it out with a soldier who's going to be deployed for months on end? Not on your life. There's just too many little issues with it. Like I said, when firing it normally, now that I have that heavy buffer in, now that I have the new extractor in, things like that, I haven't had any major issues with it. But the fact that it still malfunctions under the more extreme conditions of bump firing does cause me some concern. Like I said, the hammer follow doesn't really cause me any concern. That's normal. But the fact that I will get stovepipes when I'm bump firing it, that does cause me some concern. So far it hasn't happened under normal conditions, but the fact that it can happen under bump fire conditions still does bug me. But we will see. We just need more rounds to it. We've got through the same amount of rounds that it failed the first time, effectively doubled that, so that's a good sign, but it still has a long way to go before I would consider it a general recommend. And that is my problem with this gun at this point. This 10.5-inch pistol version that they have at this point for me, I would say that for most people it's going to be more of a headache than it's worth, because I can almost all but guarantee you that it's going to come in overgassed. You're going to have to wind up messing with the gas system in some way, shape, or form, either putting in new springs in it. It's already got an AR-10 spring in there. Messing with the buffer weights, which is what I did. Maybe messing with some of the components of the bolts, like I did with getting a new extractor and whatnot. A real concern that you would want to address with an over-gas gun is what you're going to do with the port. An adjustable gas block is probably a really good idea if you have the resources to do that. Unfortunately, I live in an apartment and most of the time I'm not here, and so I don't really have the tools to do that properly. And so for me, it's not really a great option, but if you are someone who can do that, you would probably really want to consider putting an adjustable gas block on this gun. All right. Now, as to the comments that I received from the person online, on the YouTube channel specifically. There's lots of things that I do online, I should specify. But specifically from my YouTube channel, this is what was said. Okay, so somebody wrote in, just checking on my phone here, they wrote in and said, "Hey brother, I bought a GF3 a couple months ago and have put roughly 150 rounds in it. I recently just stated," I think they meant started looking it over to see how it's holding up, and I'm seeing rust around rivets on the outside of the receiver and especially around the rail adapter. But generally, in lots of areas where two pieces of metal lay on top of each other, both inside and outside the receiver. This rifle has never been rained on or been wet ever. And I live in one of the driest states in the Union, so humidity really isn't a factor. And no corrosive ammo, only tool ammo, Wolf, and Barnaul ammo. I started researching this, and there's a post on Reddit with someone experiencing the same thing. Someone said in the post something about the manufacturing process and some types of salts that were used or are a byproduct in manufacturing of the gun, and that is not cleaned off before assembly and shipping. I remember Tools and Targets, the YouTube channel, describing when he received his GF3 that the plastic piece that Palmetto State Armory places on the charging handle for shipping had rust in it, and rust was on the handle itself that he buffed out. I don't know, man. I'm pretty bummed. Any thoughts? Have you experienced this personally or known anyone who has? I appreciate your time spent in responding. God bless. God bless you as well. As to my personal experience with Palmetto State Armory, it is no secret whatsoever that every single gun that I've had from them has had its issues. Every single one. Some of them relatively minor. Some of them could arguably be claimed to be my issue more than the gun's issue. For example, with the 103, I went ahead and filed down the hammer and bolt carrier because I didn't like the fact that it would that I could lock the bolt over the fire control group, which is not an uncommon thing with AKs, but my experience with the Palmetto State Armory guns is that can lead to malfunctions, and so I just head that off at the pass now. I consider it still to be a defect of the gun because I've seen what it can do under either the right conditions or the wrong conditions, depending on how you look at it. But that's a relatively minor one. I've had other guns that are just finicky and not entirely reliable, like the KS-47. I consider it to be reliable enough to stake my life on in one encounter if I had to. This is not something that I would give to a soldier who's going to be deployed for months on end. But it's something that at this point I've gotten to the point where I feel reasonably comfortable with it. And like I said, I've only had it malfunction under fairly extreme conditions in ways that you would expect it to malfunction under those conditions for the most part. But still not ideal, definitely overgassed, definitely problematic, and Palmetto State Armory, as I mentioned in that video, wasn't overly helpful in resolving that one, and it's still in the testing phase, before I rely on it much more than I do, and certainly before I would recommend it more than I do. In the case of the AKP that I do not own anymore, not because it was bad, I got it fixed and basically found it a good home with someone else who needed a gun that fit that description, and so we worked all that out. But with the AKP, there was lots of things on that that were just incorrectly sized. The fit and finish on it was just relatively poor, very clunky, and there was lots of things that needed to be smoothed out in order to get it to work correctly, and now it works just fine. But that one took quite a bit of effort, and in my videos on the AKP you can see that. And the GF3 was kind of the one that started it all. Actually, no, I take that back. The AKV, the 9mm, was the one that started it all, and that one had some issues as well, and actually still has some of those issues. But the GF3 is the one where I really started getting into the true rifle caliber AKs instead of just the 9mm stuff. And the 7.62x39 stuff that Palmetto State Armory had to offer. And initially I was very bummed out with that gun because I was getting malfunctions all over the place, and that's where I learned about filing down the back of the hammer and the underside of the bolt carrier, and it suddenly fixed all my problems and everything was great. I've had issues with all of the guns. Now, as to the specific issue that was mentioned in that comment that I read for you guys, I haven't experienced that personally. I've never had a Palmetto State Armory gun rust on me so far. Now, again, like this person mentioned, they mentioned living in a dry state. Well, I live in a pretty dry state too. Idaho, like I said, we only get like 14 inches of rain a year, so it's not very wet here at all. So take that for what it's worth. But I haven't had that issue. Now, it also should be said that my first habit when I get any gun is to take it home, clean it, and oil the snot out of it. And that's one of the things that people who go out shooting with me complain about all the time, is they pick up my gun and it's like, ew, this is wet. It's not wet, it's oil. And the reason why I do that is because I'm used to having guns that are a little bit more prone to rusting. For example, my CZs. I love CZ, they're an awesome company, they make lots of cool guns, but they are prone to rusting. And so I tend to preemptively just oil the snot out of them. I do not take guns out of the box and immediately start shooting them. I take them out of the box, I take them home, I get them cleaned, I take them apart, I do any fit and finish kind of work that needs to be done on them. I get everything squared away long before I ever get to the rage, and make sure that all of the surfaces are protected as much as I possibly can, and then I take them out into the elements and whatnot, and it just generally works a lot better that way. That being said, a gun that has a proper finish on it should not be particularly prone to rusting under average user conditions. And so what this person has mentioned does concern me. It's not a problem that I have personally experienced. I've seen Palmetto State Armory guns kind of wear in strange ways, especially the dust covers. Let me see if I can show you on the AK-103 what I'm talking about here. So take off the optic. There we go. There we go. Let's see if we can get an image of this on the camera. On the back of the dust cover, so faint it's really hard to see. But you'll see just a little bit of wear on the back of the dust cover. And at first glance, it almost looks a little bit like rust, but it's actually not. It's a wear mark from where the gun is sitting in the case, and that little edge will actually wear against the material that's inside the case. And so what happens is the top layer of this covering that Palmetto State Armory has on the gun, which is black, will wear off a little bit, and you'll see the under part of the their finish that they have on it, which is more of a bronze color. But it's not actually rust, it's actually a little bit different color than actual rust is. The texture is definitely different, and this is a surface that would not be prone to rusting anyways. Normally when you have problems with rust, it's moisture, as the person indicated, it's usually moisture that gets trapped inside of metal pieces or between metal pieces, where you've got some exposure to air and you've still got some moisture, and the combination of air plus moisture is what results in the rust. Something like the back of the receiver here, the back of the dust cover, is not something that is going to have that right combination. This dries out pretty quickly, and so this is basically just a rub mark is all that it is. And I have had that issue with Palmetto State Armory guns, and that is not something that I really worry about. Just trying to get this thing back together here. Oh, come on. I like that their dust covers are fairly tight until I actually have to work with one, and then the fact that they're tight gets to be a little bit annoying, but such is life. So I've had issues like that, but I haven't had any major problems with rust. Like I said, a lot of it I take care of preemptively, but like I also said, a gun with a good finish on it really shouldn't have that problem, at least not in that way. And so where does that put PSA? Well, it puts PSA in the category of, you know, basically being a lower end manufacturer, and frankly that's something that we all knew. The reason why the Palmetto State Armory guns are at the price point that they are compared to other AKs is part of it has to do with how they run the company. They're able to save some costs in some places that other companies won't be able to do. But a large part of it is just because their quality of manufacture simply is not as high as some of the other companies are. And that's a reality of PSA. They are a low-end manufacturer. Okay, they're not as bad as, say, IO or some of the Century guns. But they are a low-end manufacturer, and they have low-end products. And that low-endness, in the case of PSA, tends to manifest itself in terms of quality control. The parts themselves are usually pretty decent. They're made out of the right material, more or less made the right way, more or less sized appropriately, or at least something that you could file into size appropriately. But what kills them is quality control. And I'm not sure exactly what manufacturing processes they use or what solutions they may use to dunk things in, etc., etc. I don't know if there's an issue with salts or not. That was what was mentioned in the message. I'm not from PSA. I don't know what exactly their processes are, so I don't know. But that is something that sounds like it would be indicative of other things that I've seen from them. I've heard of this issue before. I've never dealt with it personally, and so I can't say much on that regard, but if there is a problem like that, I can almost all but guarantee you that it is a quality control issue that slipped through the cracks, like a lot of issues have been slipping through the cracks recently with Palmetto State Armory and with a lot of other gun manufacturers for that point. Ever since roughly February of last year, a lot of companies have kind of taken a nosedive in terms of quality control. It's just been rampant across the board. People are putting out so many guns to meet demand that something's going to have to suffer, and it's usually quality control. And those companies that kind of had poor quality control to begin with are that much worse, and Palmetto State Armory is definitely in that category. And we've seen evidence of that recently. We had the incidents with the AK-74s that Michiko, William dealt with, and also Graham Thumb had his issues with his AK-74 as well. Quality control is something that Palmetto State Armory really needs to work on. And there seems to be something in the manufacturing process that can result in these rust problems. And so in terms of this person, you know, what I would recommend at this point is I would recommend at least trying to contact their customer service. My luck in getting a hold of them and getting good use out of them has been fairly minimal, especially right now because of everything that's going on. They're very much so back-ordered. The first time I emailed them about the issue that I was having with the KS-47, it took them at least 10 days to respond, which for an email is a really long time. But I'd recommend contacting them, seeing what they can do on that end of things, especially if you're getting rust in rivets and stuff like that. You know, if it's something that you can, you know, take apart with normal disassembly and, you know, buff out and clean off that way, yeah, go ahead and do that. But if it's rivets, that's not normal disassembly issues right there. That's a major quality control issue, and that is something that really the factory needs to handle. So I would consider, you know, getting a hold of customer service and getting the thing sent back if you can. And in general, for anybody else who is out there listening, I would recommend that you treat Palmetto State Armory like the company that it is, and that is a low-end manufacturer that is making commercial-grade guns, not military-grade guns, for a recreational audience. They don't really intend for their guns to be military guns. They don't intend them to really be defensive guns. That's not how they're making them. and that's not the price point that they're sending them out at either. These are commercial recreational guns, and they accept on their end that not all of their guns are going to go out perfectly. That's how they are able to get to the price point that they're coming in at, which is well below a lot of the other manufacturers. They are doing that by sacrificing quality control and then fixing things on the other side. So if you get a Palmetto State Armory gun, you're going to get a relatively low cost gun, and if it's functioning correctly, a pretty good value for the money. I've been very happy with most of mine. The AKV, I'm still not entirely convinced that that is a totally awesome gun, and the KS-47 with some tweaks I think could be a pretty awesome gun, but as it comes from the factory, not so much. But on the whole, my experience has been fairly pleasant, but that's also going into it with eyes wide open, realizing that you're more than likely going to have an issue with the gun at first, and you're going to have to resolve that issue either on your own or with help from customer service. And so my general recommendation to people is, if it's, if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to take the time to fix whatever issue the gun is going to have, because there's a pretty good chance the gun is going to have at least some kind of an issue, and you're willing to take the time to do that and work it out with customer service and whatnot, or just fix it on your own, then by all means go at it. But if you're looking for something that is going to be good to go out of the box, Palmetto State Armory is probably not the company for you, at least not when it comes to AKs. Their ARs seem to be quite a bit better, although the ones chambered in 7.62x39 can be a little iffy, but still, it is what it is. Palmetto State Armory is a commercial grade manufacturer for primarily recreational shooters. It is not military. They do not make military grade weapons, and they do not make guns that are primarily meant to be self-defense guns. I do use them for self-defense, but that is after testing them, and in the case of ones that I'm still testing, keeping a very, very close eye on it and having backup guns just in case that one goes down, those kinds of things in place. Like I said, if you're looking for something that's turnkey, something that's just ready to go out of the box, Palmetto State Armory is not going to be for you. It is a company where you're more than likely going to have at least an issue with the gun that's going to have to be resolved in some way, shape, or form. Okay, doesn't mean that they're not worth it, as long as you're willing to take the time to do whatever needs to be done, or invest at least the time in sending it back and forth to the factory and whatnot. It doesn't mean that it's not worth it. It just means that you shouldn't expect immediate gratification from it. Same thing I had with my GF3. For the longest time, it would not run right. Now it runs just fine, and I use it as a self-defense gun around the apartment. It is my go-to gun for self-defense in the apartment. That's what it is, and it's great for that. My primary plinking gun is the Palmetto State Armory AK-103. Shoots cheap rounds, and it's just fun to deal with. I just like that gun. It's a fun gun. But none of these guns were perfect out of the box. And so when it comes, and I've tried to be very upfront about that in my videos, that yes, I keep buying these things because they're at a value that I can get to. I can actually afford them. But I always have issues with them. And you should expect that as well. I'm not trying to be mean to Palmetto State Armory. I like that they're putting out guns like this, whereas other companies, a lot of them are not. And certainly cheaper than pretty much anybody else that would have anything that's roughly comparable. But they still suffer from major quality control issues, and because of that, your first go around with the gun is probably not going to be great. The rust issue is fairly severe. A lot of the other issues I've been able to deal with a little bit more easily than that. But expect it. There's a good chance you might have to send the gun back in. It's the reality of it, or at the very least have some work done on it. Alright, thank you all for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.